Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of UAE School Leaders with your host, Mohsin. In today's episode, we have Miss Dalia and Mr. Jeff. We will be discussing the distance learning evaluation, how schools should prepare themselves, what will the inspection day look like, and any tips and advice that we can share to help school leaders prepare for this evaluation. So distance learning has been continuing for 8 weeks now, and the governing bodies feel there is a need to evaluate all schools to monitor the provisions and impact on students' learning experiences. So let me start with Mr. Jeff. Jeff, so how should schools prepare themselves for the distance learning evaluation?
First of all, good afternoon. I'm happy to be here. I think what's important is that schools give a very clear picture of the diversity and range of work that's taken place over the last 7-8 weeks. Obviously many schools have either asynchronous or synchronous learning or a mixture. So their typical sort of range would include things like video lessons, short drop-in clinics for small groups of students, for example. So obviously the inspectors will look to see the planning, they look for samples and exemplars of the work that's happened. But what I would suggest to schools is they prepare a shared drive in advance and they make sure that they have some samples available, because obviously the inspection time is pretty limited. 5 hours for, I think it's 2 inspectors for 5 hours across the 2 languages, English and the Arabic subjects, is quite limited. So there won't be a huge amount of time on the day. So if schools can have all of this prepared, ready, that's going to help, and as with a typical inspection, it would be ideally looking at across the grades and across the subjects. So I know some schools are only covering the core subjects at the moment during the Ramadan timetable. Other schools are offering a full range of subjects depending on the curriculum in the school. So if schools have all of that available, that's going to be very helpful.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Jeff, for sharing that information. I just wanted to thank everyone for having me on here as well. And I wanted to add on to Mr. Evans' points there. An activity that I really enjoyed doing was actually looking at the distance learning evaluation tool and the inspection framework, and actually linking the performance standards along with the 13 frames and drawing parallels between them. And that actually increased my awareness as to how do we strategically pinpoint how to promote student success, student achievement, well-being, which I believe is at the forefront, as well as the priorities. I believe in linking all of the different performance standards, one thing that resonated with me was definitely parent partnerships and all of the different themes. And of course, the roles and responsibilities, as Mr. Evans said previously, understanding that and looking at how it looks like right now in schools, and also thinking about what the transition plan will look like and moving on to the next stage.
What documents should schools have prepared prior to this inspection?
We talked about exemplars of planning and obviously the activities that have taken place, including feedback, because many teachers are working tremendously hard. I think that's important to mention. Teachers are actually working longer hours. It's a pretty stressful time for many teachers with different systems being used. So you should have examples of the work, examples of the feedback that's been provided. So whether that's verbal, video, in writing, whatever mechanism has been used. But I think it's also useful for schools to have ready examples, communication with parents. So certainly any positive examples of feedback that parents have given, and some of the initiatives that schools have used to continue things like student engagement or the social well-being side of school life. So as Dalia said, obviously the academic work is one side, but the well-being and the student sort of interaction, if you like, certainly with the younger children, is one of the main factors. So the inspectors really will want to see everything that's happened, including parental communication and parental engagement.
Just to add on to what Mr. Evan has said previously, absolutely. I personally recommend thinking about the successful experiences that schools have had, and per each phase, think about a case study. highlighting what Mr. Evans has just said, but again, thinking about it as you would any audit. How do you go through an inspection, and what material do you use to prepare yourself and your team to ensure that there is a link between the connections and how to best showcase quality education? What policies do you have? What policies do you need to revisit? Absolutely, for me, at the forefront would be well-being, inclusion, cyber safety. Those are the critical documents that I feel that should be revisited right now in terms of how is it being implemented, and to also gather evidence as to how successful it is. And what interventions are you employing? What parental concerns have been brought up, and what have you done strategically to address them to ensure the safety and the well-being and the academic modification and adaptation to student success and student achievement? And what kind of community and sense of belonging has the school established to celebrate each other in a world of social distancing? How are you bringing that together virtually?
Thank you so much there, Dalia. So then, what would a typical inspection day look like with this distance learning evaluation?
So I would say definitely focus on progress and impact. While you have an inspection going on, think about the data that has been presented to the evaluators. Like what Mr. Evan has said, you have 2 inspectors, 5 hours at a time. That's not a lot of time. They might use a couple of more hours for write-up just to put all the pieces together, and a couple of interviews with the academic team as well as the well-being team. And they'll come in to do some observations. Basically, what they want to see, what we all want to see as educators, is that children are building upon their schema, that they are connecting new knowledge to prior knowledge. And the purpose of this whole exercise for an observation, for an evaluation of a distance learning provision, is to ensure that children are learning, but also enjoying their learning. So if you do have a project-based learning experience journey going on, how is it complementing what they're doing, and how are they making use, and how are they making how are they knowing what exactly is going on around them in the world, and how are they connecting that with their peers, with their adults? That's basically what I think everyone will be looking for.
That's great. And Mr. Jeff, anything that you want to add to that?
Yes, what interests me now with the format of these inspections, obviously the Ministry of Education schools, the government schools, were mandated to carry out live teaching, live lessons, in some cases with very few students. Many of the private schools opted to have a different approach from the start, which is potentially, the pros and cons for each, but where they have pre-recorded lessons, obviously students can access those, students or parents, if their children are younger or the parents are helping out, those are accessible anytime. So what would happen in terms of a school where they have that approach, I'm guessing, is that they can choose to have the best examples and the best practice ready. Whereas with a typical live inspection or live teaching, the school may select the grades and the subjects or the teachers to be visited, but it may or may not, it's live, like our experience now. So with the private schools, they do have the opportunity in many cases to showcase best practice. And I think, as you would do in a full Urtica inspection or a KHDA inspection, you'd want to try and make sure that the inspectors see all of the good work that's going on, whether that's at the moment or whether that's the week before or 2 weeks before. So the ability to have a kind of a shared drive or a mechanism to share that, to make that accessible to the inspectors is important in case they miss anything great that's happened.
Okay, great. So a lot of the schools, they don't just have pre-recorded lessons. They also do live lessons, as you just mentioned. So how will the inspect observe these live lessons, Dalia?
According to the tool, what it states is that the protocol is they will join the live session without having, a video showing who they are. They will not engage. They're basically there to just see how well the student is learning. Also, something that is close to my heart is inclusion. So if you have a student of determination that is working with a learning support assistant, a support teacher, or a teacher themselves, what exactly are you doing in that lesson, and what kind of objective are you working on? Is it closely linked to their needs? Are you supporting them? And also a crucial element to this is parent partnerships. And do parents know how to facilitate the learning? I think these are all elements that will be observed and analyzed by the inspectors as well, to see how well students are learning and how much they're enjoying their learning journey.
Great, thank you so much. And Jeff, could you care to share some thoughts on any live lesson observations?
I would hope that there's an opportunity if the school has, obviously if the school has live lessons, the inspectors will drop in. As Dalia said, the inspectors will drop in without being observed or without taking part. They'll just be passive observers. The other thing that I would like them to be able to see is the good work that many schools have put in with, whether it's small group sessions with students. So it could be a small group reading session. For example, some of the schools have teaching assistants involved. So they may have whether it's ESL or special needs or a teaching assistant working with smaller groups so they can differentiate. They also have some very effective parental supports and parental workshops, because, if your child is under, 7 years old, maybe, you're actually going to be doing a lot of the work or supporting a lot of the work. And parents have found it tough as well as teachers. So some of the schools have done great work in these areas. So I would hope that within this short time, it's a snapshot audit, really. It's a kind of a high level process, but I hope there's the opportunity for schools to show all of this in a short time. And of course, during the day, there would also be interviews with senior leaders where they ask them about safeguarding and all of the other policies, as Dalia mentioned earlier.
Great. So the evaluation grading will be developed, partially developed, and not developed. What tips and advice can you both share and provide to other school leaders to help them prepare for this evaluation?
Like I said earlier, looking at the inspection framework as well as the 13 themes and identifying what are their strengths, what are they doing really well, and how can they best showcase that, capitalizing on that, and developing strategically the case studies per each phase. And also highlighting to the inspectors, as we all are, we're all educators, we want the best for our children, but also realizing that the purpose of this whole exercise is to identify what are the steps moving forward. Yes, maybe if it's partially developed, maybe they haven't gotten the 9 themes. Maybe if it is developed, they got more than the 9 themes. Or, if it's not developed, I'm sure there are different ways where they can look at the different themes and showcase what they're doing in a positive light, in a meaningful way, but also to express to the evaluators that this is something that is going to shape the future of education. And when we do reopen, how will that look like in your school? Do children have a full understanding of what is happening, why they're learning from home, and why they will then move into school, and then while they're in the building, why will they then still need to work on social distancing practices? And again, what does that mean for well-being? And how do we support all stakeholders? How do we develop teachers and leaders and students and our parents to make sure that we are all thinking about this positively and moving forward to the next step? We're not going back to the way things were before. We're going into a new tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And Jeff, any tips and advice that you can share with other school leaders to help them prepare for this distance learning evaluation?
The only thing I would suggest, as with a full inspection, is to not be afraid to some extent, I'll say it carefully, but to some extent to be open and honest with the inspectors and discuss anything that you've tried that didn't work and what you've done to resolve it. So in other words, schools had 2 days to prepare for this. They were called in on Wednesday, Tuesday, and they had to submit plans on a Thursday, which is, you know, pretty sudden. So some of the initial approaches perhaps weren't ideal, and schools have worked very hard and they have adjusted their practice and their approaches. The other thing that we've seen recently in the last week since the announcement is schools actually up in the game in terms of some of the areas perhaps that they hadn't focused on as clearly. So there would be a benefit certainly in sharing any plans that you have with the inspectors, whether that's for the next month or, you know, longer term. At the moment, we do have discussions about September, whether you know, schools will reopen fully or whether there'll be a kind of a mixed approach. So any plans over the summer or any plans you know, for assessment, that kind of area would be worth sharing, so that the school, as with a typical full inspection, I should say, the inspectors get a clear picture that the school leadership know very much where they're going with, you know, with the initiative.
Thank you so much to both of you. It has been an absolute pleasure. And until next time, goodbye.
Thank you.